Hello, I am the Nihilist and welcome to Islington Mill and, a monthly podcast series about the cultural life and times of one of the UK's most beloved artist-led creative hubs, Salford's Islington Mill. I'm not putting music behind the intro today. I'm doing a different take on the podcast this month. I'm doing a live recording off my mobile phone. So you'll probably be hearing some music and some building work and some noise, maybe even some wind. I'm currently stood on the balcony of Studio 409, the studio that I work from with some other folks here at Islington Mill. If you've been listening to the podcast regularly for the last year or more, as long as we've been putting it out and producing it, you will know that Islington Mill is going through some radical changes at the moment. There's a lot of building work going on here at the mill. A brand new fire escape has been put in, which goes all the way from the ground up to the 5th floor, all the way up to the roof of the building. I'm currently looking at it right now, stood on our balcony looking at the new fire escape balconies that have been put in, and there's, looking across the mill, across the courtyard, there's also the new Islington building, which has now been folded into the overall mill complex that has a bunch of new studios in it, and a bunch of new artists have moved into the mill to start doing their art and producing their work here in the new Islington building, along with all the artists who are already based in the original mill building. I want to talk this month about the changes that are going on at Islington Mill and the future as it stands for not just the buildings and the complex of buildings that are here, but for the community and the culture that exists here. I've been covering a lot of this in the last few episodes of Islington Mill but for this one, I'm not going to do a general view of the changes happening at Islington Mill. I'm going to talk specifically about our studio here, Studio 409, and where we're at, where we've come from, where we're at, and where we would ideally like to go. And I'm going to be interviewing my studio co-worker, Faye, on how we work here and what we do and the ideal things that we would like to achieve moving forward with this studio, with the potential changes that could happen here, but also the community aspect of what we do. There's been a lot of talk lately about community and how to maintain the integrity of the mill's community while the mill itself is changing and more people are coming in and being involved with the studios and with the overall mill project, really. Not to mention the fact that some of the previously existing projects are now beginning to come to fruition, such as Bill Campbell's Modelling Queer Utopias project, which we have covered in quite a lot of detail actually in some of the previous podcasts on Islington Mill. And so I'm currently stood on the balcony overlooking a glorious sunny Salford day. It's the last day of May the 30th. I'm kind of looking out of our balcony on the 4th floor, so it's quite high, so I've got a very good vantage point. I'm seeing a lot of really cool stuff going on. I'm looking out over the Regent's Trading Estate behind the mill, where some of the mill artists are still based, and the mill will be taking over some of that space and regenerating it. But I can see a lot of the building work that's continuing to be done, even though it's almost finished. It's been at the almost finished stage for quite a while now, and the finish line, even though it's within sight, it's kind of constantly on the horizon and we haven't reached it yet. I'm looking across the courtyard, and even though the courtyard has been opened up again, it's not fully completely finished. There's still a massive crane in the middle of it, which means that the courtyard has not yet returned to the format of courtyard that it was pre-pandemic in about 2019, which was one of the nicest spaces for people to congregate in the mill, where different people who worked on different floors and might not necessarily get to interact with each other within the building would come out and meet each other, and people would make connections and get to know each other outside of the strictly working on art in a studio scenario. There's quite a lot of noise going on. They're currently working on the roof at the moment, so I'm going to step inside, back into the studio, where my studio production partner, Faye, is currently recording a mix. So you're going to be hearing some noise. I'm just going to walk over to the door and stick the phone up to the door so you can hear what it is that she's playing. Let's give it a little listen. Hardstyle. Faye's busy in the mix there. I'm going to leave her to it until she's done. I wanted to give this episode a bit of a different format than the usual sat around a table, all people talking into a microphone. I wanted to give this a more live feel and on the spot kind of vibe. So I'm walking around now through the studio. I'm walking out of the studio into the corridor. You can probably hear that the tone of my voice has changed because we're now in a corridor and the reverb is different. If you want to know more about reverb and what that means, I would direct you to my other monthly podcast series, Liner Notes, which I'm doing to accompany my Album of the Month Club project. You can hear those podcasts on Spotify and just follow the links. I'll be putting them in the information for this podcast. If you want to find out more, that's about the vague theory of what reverb is, which you can hear in my voice. I'm in the corridor now. Walking out of the corridor into the kitchenette area, the shared space. This space has been kind of walled off for about a year as a lot of work goes on, but now the walls have come down and it's been opened out again. There's a brand new, like I mentioned earlier, the brand new fire escape is here. There's a door. I'm going to push it and see if it's open. No, it's not open, so I can't walk out onto the fire escape. Not really willing to do that until I know it's completely safe to do so, even though I'm assuming it is. We just haven't been given the permission to go out there yet. So the other big thing, though, and I'm standing right in front of it now and looking at it, you might be able to hear my voice changing again as I go closer to it, is the lift that's been put in. The lift that has been put in, which makes it easier for people who might have mobility issues to get from floor to floor. It's not, the door is there and the light is on. It says out of order. So I'm assuming that the lift isn't working yet, but I've been told that by the end of this week, that it will start working again, and that is going to be an amazing thing to be able to let people who can't normally get up this far into the building, who might have difficulty walking up 4 flights of stairs, to get up here. But as I said, these things aren't completely finished yet, even though they're there and they seem like they're ready to go. We're just waiting for the okay to know that everything is finished and that we can start using the fire escapes, the balconies, the lift that's been put in. I'm now walking into the toilet. As you can probably hear the reverb around my voice change again. I don't know why I'm doing this, actually. You don't really need to know that there's a new toilet here. But if, just in case you were curious, yes, we have a new toilet and it's very nice. Thank you indeed. Islington Mill. So I'm currently sat in the corridor outside the new kitchenette area, lift fire escape area. I've come out of the toilet. I don't think you really needed to hear more about the toilet. You need to know that there is a functional toilet on the 4th floor of Islington Mill. But I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate the changes that have happened on this floor specifically. Yeah, there's been changes throughout the mill, that's a given. But there's been a lot of changes going on the 4th floor as well. Like I said, you can probably hear a certain amount of reverb off my voice. There's been lots of new fire doors put in, new walls put in. The kind of geography of the 4th floor has changed a bit. And I wanted to talk about the changes on the 4th floor, but more specifically, the changes that have happened in the past few years, but are probably going to continue to happen in Studio 409 specifically, which is the studio that me and my fellow co-workers and friends work from. To give you a potted history of who we are and what we do, I thought I would just take this opportunity to do a specific podcast episode about us and about 409, because I think there's a lot of people within Islington Mill who don't actually know who we are and what we do, because it's kind of tucked away at the very top corner of the building. You have to walk through a lot of corridors and a lot of doors to get to where we are based. And we do spend a lot of time in the studio, but we might not be spending a vast amount of time around the rest of the mill. So people who haven't come up this far or who don't hang out in the courtyard as slightly inhospitable compared to what it was as it is now, might not know who we are. And I wanted to explain the history of who we are, what we do in Studio 409, but also take a moment to talk about me and what I do. and more specifically, this very podcast that you're listening to. I have been producing this podcast and the other podcast that I used to produce for Islington Mill, which is called Islington Mill is Queer. Both of those podcasts, this one, Islington Mill and the older one, Islington Mill is Queer, I've been producing them for over 2 years now. I think there's about over 20 different episodes of the two combined podcasts online for people to listen to. They're on Podbean, which is the platform that I use for distributing the podcasts, but also through Podbean, they go out on all the major podcast platforms. So I'm not sure where you are listening to this right now, but I guess Spotify might be a good guess, because Spotify seems to be the most popular music and podcast sharing platform. And this podcast does go up there. So I think there's a good chance that you might be listening to this on Spotify. So you can check out all the older editions of this podcast that are up there. Islington Mill and this particular podcast. And then the previous series, Islington Mill is Queer, is up there as well. But I want to talk about how I came to produce this podcast, the different things that I've covered within the podcast up to this point. And also I want to talk about the changing shape of this podcast and how I see it moving forward in the future. So I've come back out onto the balcony, so you're going to probably hear some banging and some clacking and some stuff, real life noise happening in the background. Hopefully it's not going to get too loud to obscure my delectable Irish tones from your ear holes. But if you bear with me, this might seem, I don't know, there's a part of me that thinks that what we want to do with this podcast episode is a bit self-indulgent. And it may be. I don't have anything against necessarily people indulging themselves if what they are getting out of it is something that's quite meaningful and valuable. And I hope that this is, because what I want to do is explain to the listeners who I am, who we are, what we do, and how it integrates into the mill at large and the community here. So I'm going to start by giving you a potted history of how I became involved in Studio 409 and the other people that are involved in Studio 409 too. And in a nutshell, basically, I was invited by Bill Campbell in November. Bill Campbell is the person who part owns and part runs the mill. You can go back through, if you want to know more about Bill himself and his story, you can go back through past episodes of both this podcast and Islington Mill is Queer to find out his story, where some of these details will have been covered before, but I think it's important to go over them again as context for this episode of Islington Mill and. So in November 2020, I was brought to this space, Studio 409, by Bill Campbell, to do a series of interviews with him on the subject of his addiction journey. Bill had heard me talking to some other folks in the courtyard of Islington Mill previous to that, saying that I was interested in putting together a podcast about sex and sexuality, specifically queer sex and sexuality, and he was very keen to be involved in that podcast because he had things he wanted to talk about his own journey of sexuality, however you want to describe that. I don't know what the actual word for that is. But also he had another project that he wanted to involve me in, and that was the documentation of his addiction and sobriety journey. So this was in November 2020, which was, obviously bang into the pandemic time. People were still in lockdown. Wasn't as harsh as it had started in March of that year, but it was still a thing, and people were still isolating and being very socially isolated from each other. And that was a big thing around places like Islington Mill, where a culture of getting to know people and meeting different people with different skill sets, and even just meeting people that you find interesting and hanging out and going to the club space or going to a party or any of that sort of stuff was and still is quite an integral part of culture here at Islington Mill. So to be invited by Bill to do this podcast series was a really great opportunity for me to try and hone my skill at creating podcasts and audio content to be streamed, but also felt like a nice little way to be able to get out of the house that I had been stuck in for so long, isolating in with my partner, who, you know, I'm sure my partner Joe won't take any offense at me saying that, even though we absolutely love each other and are life partners who at this point in time are committed to staying with each other forever. We were, you know, it was lockdown. We were getting really pissed off of only being able to be around each other all the time. And that's a natural thing. I'm sure everyone who was in lockdown with their other halves experienced something similar. It was just, you know, it's just the reality of what lockdown was like. It just got heavy in terms of being bereft of social interactions, really took its toll. So Bill invited me to Studio 409 in November of 2020 to document through a series of interviews his addiction journey. Bill has since gone on to put into writing a lot of what we covered in the audio series. I don't know if this series of interviews is ever going to go public. That's completely up to Bill. So he may choose to put those out for people to listen to at some point. But either way, whether he does or whether he doesn't, he is using a lot of that information in a new project that he has coming up in conjunction with MIF this summer here in Manchester and Salford. And he's creating a fanzine that is explaining the history of Islington Mill, but also explaining his own personal history through, through a lot of the things that we covered on the podcast series. He's putting it into a fanzine and he's taking it out of the audio format and writing it up, which I think is great. So that information is out there. And while I always see that everything I do that isn't specifically for broadcast is still confidential, I know now that Bill is sharing a lot of this information publicly, so I don't think he's going to have a problem with me saying this on this podcast. So that was the start. I was brought up to Studio 409 in November 2020 to work on a series of audio interviews with Bill as a documentation of where he was in his sobriety and addiction journey at that time. I found out from Bill that this space was the original living quarters of where he used to live when he first discovered and moved into the mill and started using it as an artist studio space. We have covered this history in depth in a lot of the podcasts that we've put out previously, so I'm not too keen to go too deeply into that, only to reiterate that this specific space, what we now call Studio 409, it's got a very, very special and dear place in Bill Campbell's heart because it was where he lived originally when he first started living at Islington Mill. So this place has got this isn't just one of the many different artist studios within the Islington Mill complex of studios. This one has got a very special place in terms of the overall mill culture and the culture that has developed here at Islington Mill, because it wasn't just an artist space to start with. It was the living headquarters of the people who came to formulate Islington Mill and turn it into the community that it is today. I bring up the word community there, and that is something that I'm going to go into in more depth in a bit, because somebody is chatting to me from somewhere. Hello, I'm just talking about you for the podcast. I'm talking about you, not to you. I'm going to go inside now. Sorry about that. I was rudely interrupted by Isadora Dark and Rachel Goodyear shouting hello at me from the other new fire escape stairwell on the other side of the building. But it's quite apt that they interrupted me just there. But hey, it's great. It's audio verite. That's what we're going for with this podcast. Audio verite, baby. Because I want to talk about community, and that's a very big aspect of what is going on here at Studio 409 and also more generally at Islington Mill. But, you know, it's something that I have thoughts about and that I have critiques about the general approach to the idea of how to formalize communities and stuff like that. And yeah, I'm just going to get into it right now. So after I had done the series of interviews with Bill in November 2020, he was kind enough to give me the keys to the space and tell me that if I wanted to use the space as an artist studio, if there was anything I wanted to create or produce from the studio, that I was welcome to it. And this was to kind of also keep the history of this specific studio live in terms of keeping artists working on projects that would benefit Islington Mill as a whole, and the culture and the, community that exists here. So, two things I was able to use the studio for. I was able to produce the content that I quit my job in the middle of lockdown. I was a carer, and I moved into both producing podcasts but also producing adult content. And Bill was kind enough to let me use the studio to produce both of these things, and I did. And they now basically have turned into my income and my living, and I'm able to have a fairly decent, comfortable living off doing both of those things, thanks to being granted the space to work within it. So I'm always very, very grateful for the use of this space and to Bill. And like I said, I felt from talking to Bill, I not just felt, but I knew that this space was a very special kind of space within the overall mill complex. To me, this space feels a bit like the heart of Islington Mill, where things can be experimented with and developed and taken out into the broader mill community. They may not always work, but at least there is some space within Islington Mill to experiment and to hopefully affect change within the overall mill community. And one of the first things I did once I got into the flow of creating the content that I was creating, I invited some of my friends to come to the studio too, to create content with me, specifically music production content and podcast stuff as well, and some of the adult content, of course. I was able to bring my friends in to do all of that, but the adult content was just kind of happening once in a blue moon, but the music content was something that was happening much more regularly. So I invited Laurie Williams, who is known as, her performance name is Violet Blonde. She's an incredibly talented drag performer based in Manchester for ages and ages, but she's also an incredibly talented musician, and she works with a lot of the Manchester's premier drag artists to create music for them. Oh, there's some banging going on in the back, so audio verite style, I'm going to walk back into the studio room, maybe get out of the earshot of all that banging. So I invited Laurie Williams up to create music here, which we did with a number of different drag queens, and that's still a project that's ongoing. And we have... the next thing that happened after that was that a few more of Manchester's top queer / drag creative talent moved into Islington Mill in general, into the Parramatta building, which is also known as the B&B. This was in about... I can't remember actually when this was about, but it was kind of around the start of the new year of 21, I think. And knowing that there was people in Studio 409 who were creating music, some of those artists came up to Studio 409 and started chipping in with the music production and just jamming with us as well. And the two main people who were involved in that were Grace Annie Smith and Bo Azra. And there's a kind of a little band formed, a little band of queer musicians, and even people who, I don't know, some of these people probably don't even want to define themselves as musicians, because some of these folks, this is the first time they'd ever had a shot at playing music in a band or, playing on an instrument with a group of people. There was about 7 or 8 of us in total, including some other names I'm going to drop are Geordie and Gert Dixon, and who else was involved in that? I know I'm going to forget people, and I apologise in advance, but it was a really, really lovely creative time with the music happening. It wasn't just that we were producing music, which is a great vibe anyway, and I think that's worthwhile doing. Whoever you are, I would recommend just doing music. It's, no matter how talentless you feel you may be, screw that. Just do it. Pick something up, write something with a pen, sing something out your mouth. Even if you can't sing, you think you can, doesn't matter. Just open your mouth and belt something out. It's really important, I feel, as people, that we get the chance to try and dick around with music, no matter how talented you are. You feel you are. We started doing that here, and it became a bit of a haven. It became a bit of a safe space and a haven for a group of queers who felt ostracized by the general community anyway, but who had that ostracization impacted by lockdown that was happening and the social isolation that we were going through. So using the studio as a workspace, we were able to still get together and have community, do community things and just hang out and talk and, get drunk sometimes and have a little party, but also create art and just be there for each other and help each other through the horrible, horrible time that was lockdown. Things changed though. It didn't all go according to plan and some people had to leave and it wasn't great. No fault of what was happening in Studio 409. There was extraneous factors at play that I don't want to go into because that's for another podcast. But for that brief, I'd say not too brief, but for about 6 months around the start, from spring through summer into autumn of 2001, Studio 409 became a haven for a group of artistic queers who had nowhere else to go, but we had each other. And we had each other to make music with and to support each other, like I said, through a really horrible time. And that's, to me, what actually community is. It's not something that somebody sits there and dictates on a piece of paper the rules and regulations of what a community should be and then tries to enact that in real life. That, to me, is not community. Community is something that is organic and that should be open to all to become involved in and should be allowed to grow and develop on its own terms rather than terms being imposed on it by other individuals or other groups. I know, however, saying that it is important to have some direction and to have boundaries within communities. That's very important. But what's more important than the boundaries in and of themselves is the methods in which we find those boundaries and we enact those boundaries, and those things need to be very organic. The reason I'm bringing this up is because Studio 409 started off to be a workspace for me. That's quite obvious. It was a workspace. Excuse me. It was a space for me to create all the different content that I was creating and put that out with an eye towards making a living to pay my rent. And it succeeded in that. But one of the offshoot things that it also succeeded in doing, which wasn't necessarily something that I had specifically in mind when I started bringing people to Studio 409 and opening the doors and getting people to come up here and do work here and just chill out if they needed to get away from, other less safe spaces. I didn't really see this place as being a community space necessarily. The community aspect of what was happening in Studio 409 was something that happened very organically and it grew. And I think that that's what has made it so healthy, has made it such a healthy community space in that way, in that people have a say. It might be stewarded by me. I feel like having the incredible opportunity to use this studio from Bill, I take the stewardship of this space very seriously. And that's why I wanted to bring queers here, queers who may not get opportunities that they deserve in the out there and straight cishet world, but also just want somewhere to go and to hang out with like-minded people and not feel at danger. That wasn't necessarily something I intended with the space, but it's definitely become a massive function of the space. And even though Islington Mill is a very accepting place anyway, I feel, from my vantage point as a cisgender white man, I still think it's important to have a space within Islington Mill where these ideals are enacted. And enacted, I feel, in a non-dictatorial way, in an organic way, where people can have a say and things can develop. It's not the same as being a collective. This was something that we went through when people started moving up to join the band and the music stuff. Which ended up, in case you're interested in finding out a bit more about that project, that ended up being called Monsalai, MONSALAI, and there is some videos online, I believe, of a performance that we did around this time 2 years ago in Unit 2 on Regent's Trading Estate, with in collaboration with Godspeed You Black Emperor. Godspeed. No, not them. The other one, Godspeed You Peter Andre, which is Emma Thompson and Dara Kasky, Emma Thompson of Fat Out, who I've also interviewed on the Islington Mill podcasts. So if you want to know more about her and her amazing story, go back to I think it's on an episode of Islington Mill is Queer, and you can find out more about Emma. But that project was called Monsalai, and there is some video footage floating around on YouTube of some of the music and performances that we did, if you're interested in finding that out about that. But the reason that I'm talking about all this is, as I mentioned at the start of the podcast, Islington Mill is entering into a new phase of its existence. It's been on the cusp of this phase for almost 3 years now. Practically the same amount of time as I've been working here in 409. The redevelopment of the buildings and the expansion of the project is happening with the influx of cash from the... I should know what this is because I've covered it on the podcast before, but it's really complex and confusing and I don't fully understand all of it. But anyway, Islington Mill has been given a lot of money by the European Arts Fund, I believe, and maybe some other funding pots. And now the building is being redeveloped and it's almost coming to the end of that project. The reason that I'm doing this podcast and talking about all this stuff is to lay out for people who don't know and people who are arriving new to this podcast maybe, and arriving new to the mill itself and to the community and the culture that exists here already, who I am, what I do, and who some of the people I work with are, and what we do and what we are trying to achieve here in Studio 409. It's primarily a music production space. I also produce podcasts from here. There's also a maker space aspect to it where some of the people can sew and create kind of metal-based jewelry, I think is the best way to describe it. Harnesses and chains, and do a bit of sewing and create outfits and looks for various different performance troupes and individuals and stuff. But more than just being a space where we work, which it absolutely is, and hopefully is going to remain so for quite a while, I think some changes are going to happen to the space quite soon, which is going to free up space within it, which I'm really excited about, because then we can finally knuckle down and get this space turned into the space that we want it to be. I'm going to cover that later with Faye. But I just wanted to get down on record who we are, what we are, and what we want to do with this space, because it's fucking great, I'm not gonna lie. And one of the things that has come out of this space is this very podcast that you're listening to right now. And I've been spending a lot of time trying to source people to interview and to cover on this podcast. I like to cover different things every month, even though there are themes and that there are repeat episodes of specific people that I like to chat to and who have very interesting stories who I want to cover in depth. I'm also thinking about making a change to this podcast too, and throwing it open to the community here at Islington Mill to approach me and pitch at me various subjects and various things to be covered on the podcast, because I'm feeling that at the moment, while I want this podcast to serve the community as a whole, it may not be doing so because I'm fully in charge of it, if you know what I mean. I'm basically writing, producing and directing this podcast, and that's great, but I'm taking this chance to record this specific podcast right now, a slightly more indulgent one where I'm going to be doing most of the talking, and I'm going to interview my studio partner in a minute to cover some of the other bits. But after this podcast, and maybe one more to talk about New Islington with Rachel Goodyear, who is the person in charge of that project, I want to throw this podcast open to the mill community to pitch things at me, or even if there's artists and creators who work here who maybe feel that they haven't been fully integrated into the mill community, or, you know, there's a lot of people here who seem to know themselves and each other very well, but we don't know where we fit into all of that. I want to use this podcast as an opportunity for other people within Islington Mill to be interviewed and to talk about what it is that they do and what it is that they want to achieve. So I'm going to do this very specifically now. I'm going to, as of, this is May, there will be another podcast in June. I am going to be recording some other ongoing themed podcasts that are going to be like sequels to some of the ones that we've covered before in the future. But beyond those, I am now officially putting out there that I'm going to be accepting pitches for stuff to cover in this podcast. And that can be anything. anything to do with anything based in Islington Mill, any of the people who work here, anything that people want to cover, any issues, anything that they want to talk about. Doesn't even need to have to be an interview. It could be just a spoken word piece, or a piece of fiction, or a piece of music. Interviews, of course, are always the best content for podcasts, I think. And if you have been listening to, a few of these podcasts and some of my other work, I would, I think, is it not too big-headed of me to say that I think I'm good at this? So I want to let people know that if interviews are what they want to do, that you're in very safe hands with me as an interviewer. The nihilist. I'm not a journalist. I'm not looking for tea, and I'm looking for shade or scandal or controversy or offense or anything like that. I just want people to be their most authentic selves, and I'm a very relaxed person in terms of people presenting me with their most authentic selves. I think that's why I'm good at this. So that's me officially taking this moment to say that if people have ideas for things that they think should be covered on this podcast, please let me know. I'm going to start putting posters up around Islington Mill to make that clear, and I'm probably going to start a new email address to accept submissions and just people to get in contact with me with ideas for stuff to cover on this podcast. But that's me officially putting it out there now. I think I've got a couple more podcasts, like I said, to go before that will become the reality, but I want this to become a bit more like a community radio existing here at Islington Mill. This ties into some of the things that we are already achieving at Studio 409, like the Dead Air live streams that I'm going to talk to my studio partner Faye about very shortly. But I would like this podcast, the Islington Mill and podcast, to exist as a kind of community radio service for the community here at Islington Mill. And yeah, if you have ideas, please let me know. You can, if you have something now, you can get in touch with me through my thenihilist@gmail address, which is THENIALLIST@gmail.com. Give me an email if you want to submit something that you'd like to cover on the podcast with me. But I'm very open to all ideas and to all takes. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what people are going to come to me with.
Yeah.
So, I'm back in Studio 409, the little music hub heart that we have here, with my studio partner. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I am Faye. I affectionately call myself, with permission, Niall's trans daughter, basically. I'm a 25-year-old non-binary woman who moved to Manchester not even 2 years ago now. It'll be 2 years in June. And Niall very early on got me involved in the Islington Mill space, and I've been here ever since. I do lighting engineering for a couple of venues in town.
What does that mean?
So that generally means making sure the lights flash and move and strobe in whichever way suits kind of the music. So I'm basically the light DJ, if you will.
Cool.
A very fulfilling job. Late shifts, but I also have a couple of creative outlets that actually relate to Islington Mill, where I make harnesses out of chains and hardware for queer people to wear, and I use the space to do it. And then I also practice my DJing a lot here, and the gigs have been coming, I'm not afraid to call myself a DJ.
You are. You're also a very good DJ.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's why you are my queer daughter. Because you're a good DJ.
Yeah.
Keeping it in the family.
Yeah.
Tell us about... Well, actually, no. Let's talk about Dead Air first.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we do here from this music studio in Studio 409 that is the most kind of visible and thing that goes out to the public that... since it started going out, actually quite a lot of people have said to me, it's oh, you've been very busy with the live streams and the DJing and stuff like that. So I'll start, but I will pass it over to you because
it's a collaborative project.
It is a collaborative project, but I also think the best things that have come out of it have come from you. But I'll get to that in a minute. So just to fill the listeners in, we live stream DJ sets from this studio via Mixcloud and also sometimes Twitch and also Instagram live streams. And we call the project Dead Air, and we get a variety of different DJs to come up. We also take slots when we just do it ourselves, but we do get a lot of guest DJs to come up to the studio and live stream DJ sets for us. And it's about showcasing a lot of the local talent that we know, but it's also about showcasing queer talent. So the vast majority of the DJs that we have put on are part of the queer community. It's not exclusively queer, but the vast majority of the people are queer, or if they're not, they're like queer affiliated, kind of like close allies kind of stuff. So yeah, it's like live streams that we've been doing since the start of this year. They're normally about an hour and a half long, but also, Faye, you've done like 2 amazing live stream projects, and I'll hand it over to you to tell people what those were.
I mean, they were amazing.
They were amazing.
As a preface, like, wow, it's an amount of work. But so it happened sort of 2 big events in quick succession. Mm-hmm. The first one I did was for International Women's Day, where me and a few other friends, part of Handsome Tantrum, sort of DJ collective, we collected a bunch of DJs and a couple DJ collectives as well to play for us on that day. We even had some live performances. Mm-hmm. But I think we started at 4 p.m. Mm-hmm. and then, or was it 2 p.m.? 2 p.m. and then finished at 2 a.m. Yep. We live streamed the whole thing. It was 12 hours of like live performances, DJ, all this sort of thing. And yeah, we did it from this studio. It was a little funny actually, because I had to hand over a lot of the tech to the rest of the team because I had a shift in the middle of it, but I arrived just before the end. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that meant like all these DJs came and they gave their time. Thank you very much to them all. Mm-hmm. And we had 12 hours of footage for them, like split in between them. And I did that and it went off super well. Like a lot of people saw it happening and were like, wow, to like see that amount of talent. And everyone who was playing or was involved was female or femme or non-binary femme. Yeah, identifying with the label of like womanhood or the experience for International Women's Day, obviously. For International Women's Day. Yeah. And yeah, so that happened, and then Trans Day of Visibility was kind of like a few weeks after that. It hadn't really come into my scope yet. I was just excited that we pulled this off. Mm-hmm. And then a friend kind of came up to me and was like, do you think you could do another one? So in the space of 2 weeks, we again like found a bunch of DJs, all piled into this space. A bunch of people came to dance with us because obviously they'd seen these streams happening. Mm-hmm. So like the Dead Air stuff had been happening at that point. You'd been inviting a lot of people. And so that one specifically, we had quite a few people just dancing around in the background and the energy was great. And like people really felt they were like at a party. Yeah. But we were also like streaming this to the world at large. Yeah. So they could also enjoy it. And yeah, it was a really satisfying project. It was amazing. I will say that, like, from my perspective as a queer but also a cis man, like when it comes to trans-centered visibility, the vast majority of it that I see out there is still all based in trauma. And that's like valid because trans people are having a fucking shit time and need to be open to talk about that. But for Trans Day of Visibility, the DJ stream was just seeing a load of trans folk have a party and it looked great. And it was like, I think we need a lot more of that kind of visibility as well to just kind of like, because also like it happens to gay folks as well, where it's like mainstream cishet society is only seems to be really interested in us for our trauma, I think, or the kind of like that kind of... Or the performance that we can put on. Yeah. I mean, they also love our parties as well, though, because we have the best fucking parties. That's interesting that you mentioned that, because I feel like they enjoy our parties, but in a very different way. Like, they don't... Part of the reason the live stream felt so good for Trans Day of Visibility is that you are explicitly saying that this DJ is playing, and the camera's focused on them, and everyone who's there is centered around them. When you have like an event and cis people are coming to your events or like coming to events that you are on stage, that you are playing at, the experience revolves around them.
Yeah.
Because they are visitors and like customers in that space, and you are a part of it. But with a live stream, it was perfect. Because I was like, we are making these people visible. They are the center of it.
Yeah. I mean, that makes so much sense, even though it's not something that I had thought of. But yeah, I just thought it was a perfect thing to do. And I was so proud of you for doing it. And I was so proud of like this thing that we started has facilitated this. It was just, I thought it was epic. Like, I think at the time of recording this podcast, that footage isn't online, is it?
So we sent it off to the individual DJs, but it's not online. I think there'll probably be a time when it starts popping up again.
Yeah.
I think probably as promotional material.
Yeah.
I think when the next Tranuary event, because that event was organised with Liv.
With Tranuary,
the director of Tranuary.
Shout out to Liv.
Shout out to Liv.
Yeah, it was just awesome. It was like, I didn't really think that the Dead Air thing would kind of end up with something like that, even though it was possible. It was never like it wasn't going to do that, but it was so nice to actually see it happen.
It was such a natural progression from like something that's quite bare bones of like you watch these people play and you love them and they're queer. And then to have a more sort of like performative aspect, because we love a little performance. The idea of having like a camera in a corner, seeing other people dancing, seeing them enjoy it, like decoration, like announcements, like all that sort of thing. There was like some chatting on the mic. It makes it feel like more real, like you're involved.
It makes it feel like the C word, community.
C word.
So that is something that I want to talk to you about specifically as well, because like I mentioned earlier on in this podcast, like a community has kind of developed and formed around this space. And I feel like it's something that has grown very organically around it. You've also been involved in a lot of different communities and collectives. Can I ask you, what do you think the difference between a community and a collective is?
So, as some background, I've had a lot of experience organising in sort of left-wing sort of communities and cooperatives, that sort of thing. I lived in a housing cooperative when I lived in Birmingham before Manchester, and I worked at a cooperative a few times. And collectives are sort of not that different, collectives, cooperatives. There's sort of a more rigid structure to them, that they are usually a way to construct something that will last, whether that's in like a financial way or whether that's in like an organizational way. Say, for example, if you're running a cafe, it makes sense to have some sort of structure where like responsibilities and roles can be sort of equally distributed. That's very natural for those sort of spaces. But when it comes to something very creative, that's sort of a bit more organic, that people flow in and out of kind of naturally, like a shared space like this, it makes more sense to see it as a community, to see like different people who have different commitments, different attachments to things. Take, for example, Bill, who has a strong connection to this space and is part of this community and wants to see it flourish, but doesn't necessarily use the space like we do. And we use it in such a way where our main focus is music. We have a couple side hustles, but our main focus is music. And that's what we're bringing to this. We're bringing that energy. There are other people who are a bit more distant, coming in and out when they feel like they want or need the space. And that is nice and organic. That works. That's a community. If it were as a collective, which I think we tried at the beginning to sort of set up as a collective, something more structured, something with like very clear concrete goals based usually in finding funding and sort of interacting with a bigger system basically, kind of fell apart because people were missing that organic sort of connection. They wanted community rather than collectivizing in this case. So the difference there, I think.
That is really interesting. Because also there was, previous to you coming to work here, there was another kind of collective kind of thing that was happening here like 2 years ago. And that didn't really pan out either. That was like, I mean, there was extraneous factors around that. It wasn't the fault of what was going on here. But the energy that went into that at the beginning to make it a collective and to function in a proper way, in that way, like a cooperative way, like you described, kind of dissipated because of the other stuff that was going on. Is there like, what do you think, ideally, what would you like for this space, and what do you think this space needs to achieve the things that you'd like for it?
What would I like from this space? As in personally, or as a larger community project?
Both.
Personally, I think we could do so much with this space for the live streams. I think there's a few things in terms of like decorating, especially getting certain equipment as well, and sort of consolidating it into like a recognizable entity, and that might mean like a name like Studio 409 that has been sort of thrown about a few times, and some sort of, we're not talking like post every day kind of social media presence, but like maybe a sort of just simple static website of like, look, we exist, and then occasionally we show people like, this is what we've been doing in this space, sort of thing, just so people are aware of it. I'd also love to see more of the creative space used, like sort of a hot desking situation.
That was something that you mentioned earlier about the side hustle. So can you tell us, what do you actually do? Because this studio is not just a music studio. There's also a maker's part of the studio as well, which is like actually 2/3 of this entire room.
Yeah. Exactly. And that maker's space is sort of the most like, how to put it, it's used in like solid bursts. So like when it's used for like quite intensely over a short period of time. It's like a project studio. It's a project
people
studio.
Come in when they have projects to create and finish, and usually like there's a few different performance collectives who use the makerspace to
make outfits
basically, and props and stuff like that. So there is that kind of aspect of like managing a space. The entire space is kind of two different spaces within it, and managing them in maybe a slightly different way.
Yeah, I think the one that's progressed the most is the music sort of part of this space, because we've both been here quite a lot, and therefore able to kind of see it advance, like the dead air and stuff. There's not the same sort of energy in the makerspace yet. I have been using it occasionally to like, I'll have like customers come. So when I mentioned making those chain harnesses, they'll come up here. I'll fit it for them. I'll discuss ideas with them here, and like it's really good space for that. But what I would love to see from it is to see that be more used more fluidly. Because trying to get people in. And then also respecting the space and using it fairly.
And also it is worth mentioning that some of the people who will be using the space in the future and have used it in the past do have mobility issues, but those things will be sorted out by the lift that is apparently going to open up very soon. I've been told this week, but maybe next. Anyway, very soon. Very soon that'll be solved.
So in terms of like bringing people in, that's going to help a lot. And like, thankfully, the floors are mostly flat. And there's a couple bumps and stuff inside, but I think that's just natural wear for the floor.
Well, I mean, that's also something worth talking about in terms of this space has never really achieved, I think it's safe to say this from both our perspectives, it's kind of maximum potential. Like, there's stuff that needs to be done to the space, like stuff needs to be ripped out that is just furniture that's not being used anymore. And certain things are going to go into various other spaces like archives and other spaces where people will, I think, be taking back some, like Bill and Maury basically have a bunch of stuff in this room that we're in right now, taking up half of it, but they're going to be moving that upstairs once the lift comes in as well. So this is going to free up a lot of space. So there is a lot of potential to the space in terms of how it can be used. And like you said, hot desking and kind of like some kind of fluid structure for various different folks who have like projects.
Which I think leads quite naturally into this idea of like, what is the community vision that I have, which is very much, this idea of the space being perhaps not open, but like open to people who are interested in it. I have this grand vision of like sliding scale where we sort of like make enough money to pay rent, and then like people use the space as they want, sort of thing. And when the lift comes in, that's going to be great.
Yeah.
But like ideas of like pulling out the old kitchen and like pulling out all this stuff in the music studio and having, because I think, especially when it comes to music equipment, but all sort of access to tools and equipment in general, there's a financial barrier.
Yeah.
Like when I started DJing, I got a hand-me-down set of decks, but to be able to use the like sort of pioneer decks that you had in the studio, like opened up quite a few possibilities, and to have the audio interface and the mixer and the speakers and all this sort of thing opened so many opportunities, allowed me to actually like further my craft a lot quicker than if I'd been at home, like, well, it's going to take me a few months to just get one piece of kit and I need like 5 different things.
Yeah, totally. There's
and I want that for other people as well. I want them to like see that this space exists.
Yeah.
I want them to see things that they want from the space in that space already, and then actually be in it and be able to share it with everyone else around there.
Yeah.
Again, building that community, because I want to make more friends and connections with people who want to do similar things to me, and this is a perfect opportunity to bring them in to that community.
That would be great. Like, you know, just, it would be amazing to have a set of decks in here that weren't just this little controller. I've got a small Pioneer controller and it's fine, it's grand, but it would be, there's so much stuff that I feel like we need in the studio, because also as a podcast producer, I know that I can use the equipment that I've got to achieve good results at what I've got. But at the same time, I could achieve so much better results with, for instance, a few more decent microphone stands, and more audio, and foam insulation. And also
permanent vocal booth.
Yeah, a permanent vocal booth.
Because we're recording on your phone, because it would take an amount of time to set up the microphone. There's not really a huge amount of space to leave it there. Yeah. And there's not the soundproofing. So permanent vocal booth, we could have just switched it on and started recording.
And also just like a couple of webcams that are in permanent positions, permanently wired up to like a computer would be good as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of
aspirational things.
Yeah, aspirational things. If anybody has any money and wants to
if anyone's willing to invest,
to invest, that'd be great. But it's also like I specifically, and I think I speak for both of us, we do want to approach funding.
We do.
To be able to achieve the things that we know this space is capable of achieving, and how that is going to benefit a community that is forming around this place, that is based around people from various different minorities coming together. And, you know, fuck it, I'm just going to say it, this is a pitch, and we've just done it.
Yeah.
Because we need it. We need it. Like, this place is great, and the stuff that we're producing from here at the moment is awesome. Like I said, we've already achieved, like, you've done so great with those 2 streams. It's been awesome.
People would pay to put on those sort of things.
Yeah,
like,
they would.
I remember, like, there was an email that was sent in to Tranuary about, like, we will pay you to put on a live stream with our new platform. And that would have been, like, 100, 200 quid or something.
Yeah.
And like people want that. That's like valuable content.
Yeah, it is.
And we made it from the studio where, to be honest, we're ill-equipped compared to like the vast majority. Like I did a gig recently which was so high production, like loads of lights and like 4 sets of XDJ decks and like a fancy mixer, a fancy effects pad and all this sort of thing. And I was like, God, crikey. But we have people watching our stuff, or we have like simple monitors, controller, and all this sort of thing. Like people want it,
I think
and we want to make it happen. And I think like that's been slowly coming to fruition. I think like what we've kind of reached a conclusion, the 2 of us for the music space at least. That, if we have the energy for it, we should just go. Like people want to see the space happen, not just us. So if we went ahead and we're like, we're getting funding, everyone else would like gather behind us.
I mean, we are going ahead. Like, it's not like we're going to be doing this anyway because we love it, and it's, you know, it's already brought amazing rewards, but we didn't do it for rewards. We did it because it's fun and we just want to show off a little bit. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with admitting that. But actually, the things that have come from it have been incredible. And it's like, we're going to keep doing this anyway. But if we could do it to a higher standard, it would be even better. And we could achieve even more and go even further with it.
I think, like, people see the space. They walk in for the first time and they're like, wow, there's a connection to this place.
Yeah.
And there is. It was the same feeling I had when I first walked in. And I want to foster that. I want to foster people seeing this space and being like, I want to be part of that. Because it's not exclusive. Like, yeah, this is something we still want to do. But I want to see other people coming in.
Yeah.
If I walk in one day and see like a group of 5 people teaching themselves how to DJ on that controller or a proper set of decks, which, mind you, it's quite hard to get access to without like substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
Unless you want to book a pirate studio thing for ages. Like,
yeah,
I want to walk in and just see some people I've never met before, having a go on the equipment, learning, getting better, like honing their craft. People even making money from it. I want to see people making music in this studio and then getting a return on it because they have access to all this stuff.
Yeah. It's, the future is potentially very bright. No, it is very bright anyway.
It is very bright.
It is very bright anyway, but potentially could be a lot brighter. So, Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah,
that was great, and I'm going to end this portion now. Thank you. And there you have it. The potted history of Studio 409 so far. The story of where we are and our vision for where we'd like it to go. I'd like to thank you for listening to us go on about this for the past hour or so. And if you want to check out more of the Islington Mill and podcasts, search it on Spotify and you will find the back catalogue of what we've got for you to listen to there. Until next time, take care, and hopefully you will be donating your ear holes to this next month too. Bye.